Hackers and Galactic Lifeforms.
Welcome to the talk,
on the
A View into the
an
Development of an Open Source Cinematic Camera.
will be translated to English.
This talk is being translated into
change the
English for
language
you
setting in
by
the browser
Celeste
or
and
just
also by Tribute.
c3lingo.org
Any
to
feedback
provide
is
the
appreciated.
translation.
Please use the hashtag C3lingo on Twitter and
Ich mache jetzt auf
Mastodon.
Deutsch weiter,
We hope you enjoy the talk.
weil der Vortrag auch auf Deutsch ist.
Let's continue
Wie
in
immer
German.
gilt, wenn ihr Fragen einreichen wollt, tut das
Whenever
bitte
you
mit den
have a
entsprechenden
question,
Hashtags
please
auf Twitter,
use
auf Mastodon,
these
auf IRC.
hashtags on
Ihr findet
IRC,
uns
Twitter,
in
and
der
Mastodon.
Rhein-Ruhr-Stage,
You are on the Rhine-Nord
3S
stage,
und natürlich bei RC3 für
RC3
das Event.
for the event.
Und auch für diesen Talk gilt, schickt Feedback, wenn ihr habt, über den Fahrplan.
When you
Einfach
have
draufklicken und
feedback,
dann ist das Feedback-Symbol.
there's a feedback symbol on the far plan, on the schedule.
Unser Sprecher ist Sebastian Pichelhofer. Er ist Filmemacher und
Our speaker
Kameraentwickler.
is
Und
a camera
letztlich ist der Grund, dass er
developer
hier ist,
and
denn
also
sein Vortrag
a
ist zur,
film director.
zur Einblicken in die Entwicklung einer Open Source
We're looking to a view
Kinofilmkamera.
of a cinematic
Würde uns erklären,
camera
wie
development.
es mit dem Axiom-Projekt
He'll describe to us how this project
dazu kam, dass eine
was started.
selbstgebaute oder selbst erstellte Kinofilmkamera
It was
ins
self-made.
Leben gerufen wurde, mit dem Ziel, genau diese Kinoeffekte zu erzeugen, die zu einem
And the goal
Kinofilm
was to
dazugehören.
have a
Also
cinematic
eine
effect.
Körnung, eine Tiefenunschärfe und auch ein gewisses
For
Maß an
example,
Flimmern, die einfach zu dieser Atmosphäre
dieses
gehören.
limited
Das Ganze
range
gibt's seit grob 2006.
of film effects.
Sebastian hat mir vorhin gesagt, er ist 2008 zu dem Projekt gestoßen und ich würde
It
sagen,
started in
jetzt
2006 and
lassen
he
wir
came
ihn
in
mal
on
erzählen,
2008 and
was
he
hierbei
can
geht. Viel Spaß.
explain more. Have fun.
Wir sind hier im Zentralarchiv des Filmarchivs Austria.
We're
Hier
in the
lagern
Central
über
Film Archives
200.000
of
Filme.
Austria.
Das sind über 500.000 Filmrollen
There's over
oder
500,000 films
65
here.
Millionen Meter Film.
There's many
Das
millions of
Filmarchiv war
meters
so
of
nett,
film
uns
here.
hier unseren Talk aufzeichnen zu lassen.
It's a great place to have this talk here.
Online und in echt, das wäre alles ganz was anderes, aber es ist nun mal, wie es ist und wir versuchen das
Online,
Beste
of course, it's different this year, but we're doing the best we can with what we have, and it's nice to sit here.
Wir sind und sozusagen eine Location mitbringen, die
And this location can bring
möglich
us something.
wäre. Immerhin eine Chance aus der Krise sozusagen.
This is a chance to come out of the crisis this way.
Obwohl es voraufgezeichnet ist, gibt es nach dem Talk
After the talk, there's a live question and answer period. It's online.
Starten wir in die Geschichte des digitalen Films und reisen zurück sozusagen in die Steinzeit oder
And
in
let's
die
go back
Anfänge
to
des
the
digitalen Films in das
old
Jahr
ages.
2001.
That's back in
Bis jetzt war
2001.
klar, praktisch alles, was man in einem Kino gesehen hat,
And it was clear
wurde
that
auf analogen
everything
Film gedreht.
in a cinema
Es wurde
was
zwar schon einige
filmed
Zeit
in
lang die
analog at this
Postproduktion,
time.
also die Filmnachbearbeitung,
There was a lot of
durchgeht.
post-processing
Und
that was
mehr
happening,
Kinos fangen an, auf digitale
and
Projektionen
more and more
umzustellen.
films were
Aber immer noch
going
ist Film,
into digital
das
production.
analoge
But
Material,
in
die einzige
the middle
Möglichkeit,
time,
einen Film
there was still
auszuzeichnen.
the
Und
normally
das beginnt
filmed
sich
on
jetzt
analog.
langsam
It was
zu
very
ändern.
slowly was
Was ist
changing.
analoger Film eigentlich?
What
Eine
actually is analog film?
Fotoemulsion, also eine lichtsensitive Schicht
It's
auf einer
going to be a sensor that's
Folie.
light sensitive
Die
on the
verändert
film.
sich bei Kontakt mit Licht
With
und
light
wird dann
contact, the
chemisch in
base
mehreren
will have a
Schritten
chemical reaction
entwickelt,
and it will develop
fixiert
and it will
und
fix
dann
to the base.
mehrmals kopiert, durchbelichtet
And
oder
then
eben
when you
geschnitten,
film through it, or you can
tatsächlich
cut it
zerteilt, zusammengeklebt,
and
wieder
then
kopiert und so weiter.
stick it back
Im
together.
Endeffekt geht dann
In
jede
the end,
kopierte Filmrolle nach
every
diesem ganzen
copied
Prozess
film
in ein
roll
Kino und wird dort
will
durch
be
den
sent to
Projektor
one
durchgespult und projiziert.
cinema, and
Das
then
war
that one will be
über 100
projected.
Jahre lang Stand der Technik
This was
und
standard
das täglich
technical
Brot und
process
State
for
of the
over
Art
100
für
years,
viele Generationen
and
von
so this
Filmemachern.
was for over
Und wir
many
stehen jetzt
generations.
sozusagen im Jahr 2001 am Anfang oder im
And
Umbruch einer Ära, wo
then
sich
there was
das
a new revolution
komplett
happening
aufhört und in
the
sehr kurzer
2000s.
Zeit wandelt.
It was a big
Es
change.
herrscht Aufbruchsstimmung.
It was a disruption technology. There was a pressure that the film should be all digital all of a sudden. Why? Well, you save a lot of money. This analog film was very expensive. So development was really expensive. To produce it is expensive. Everything is expensive. Digital world, to save everything is very cheap, and then to edit on computer is cheaper. It's another dimension in terms of cost. And then you have different possibilities. You can the acquisition. There's a period here where Toy Story was the first animated digital film, and this is already pretty old for us. At this point, was Once Upon a Time in Mexico with Rodriguez, George Lucas with Star Wars Episode 2 was the first big production in Hollywood, a big project, the first films that was completely made digitally. And it was done through a television camera. This was the only possibility to do it in high definition and do it in 24 frames per second. The cinema camera development was still in kindergarten at this point in comparison to the television cameras. It was only in the beginning. It wasn't good enough yet. In the cinema, it had to develop over a 10-year period. You had to consider, how do you bring about the cinematic aesthetic? How do you produce this picture quality? How do you actually produce this cinematic aesthetic? There's a typical film process that you see, flicker, that comes through the 24 frames per second. In comparison to the television, then it's coming faster, it's coming fluidly. Cinema is then slower in comparison. So as it's going through the projector, it's being pushed through, and then the light is also pushing through the film, and then there's a pulse that happens because of this, and then it's different in the end what the aesthetic comes out from it. Then you have a high frame rate, and then it's going to be higher in comparison. So you have a big project. In 2012, you have The Hobbit. And then you have a very high frame rate for all of the very fast action that was happening.
And for some time, there was a similar trend for TV technology. Smart TVs were creating intelligent intermediate pictures to upscale 24 images per second to 48 and more. So they were marketed as clear motion, motion estimation and stuff like that. And the result was the Hollywood pictures that were produced very expensively were looking suddenly like a cheap soap opera. It was completely flopped. HFR is no longer something that people produce with. So it has kind of disappeared. The film grain results from the random distribution on the negative, and as opposed to the digital image sensor, which has always the same distances. So every image has this random distribution. So you can see from the negative or from the film, the random distribution dissolves into the motion. So it looks like it is more defined, has a higher resolution. There was a vendor for cinema cameras, and they had a image sensor where they were vibrating the sensor, moving the sensor for every image less than 1 pixel. So this worked, but it was way too expensive and way too difficult to do. And now the shallow depth of field, which is something that most people probably associate with the cinema aesthetic, and that depends on the projection or on the sensor, so the sensor or the negative. And the size of an APS-C sensor corresponds about the size of a Super 35 negative. The difference to a photo camera, 35 millimeter film, is the film is positioned on the left and then moves to the right, which means it is a bit larger than the film that is moved horizontally for cinema cameras, which can use only a slightly smaller opening. And 35 millimeter has about 2/3, only comparable to 60 millimeters film. So, which means that TV image has a lot more sharpness in the depth of field. And then there's also the dynamic range, which is the ratio of the darkest and brightest spots in the image, which is in TV, you see clipped highlights. That is white areas that are oversaturated, clipped. And we know that from audio recordings, when it's too much gain, then you hear some sort of noise. And that is comparable to digital images that don't have any more information because they have too much brightness. And that is the result of a dynamic range that is too low. And one of the very typical things that happen with TV recordings. The film negative, Kodak has about 13 f-stops dynamic range, and TV cameras have been below that, but currently cinema cameras are in the same range. But in TV, and you can see it with live TV, there's often clippings. So back to the year 2001. Change from camera, TV technology to cinema can't be stopped anymore. So, as I said, it's a lot cheaper. So this is where technology is going. Storage is cheap. Camera technology is being replaced by, or is being caught up by computer technology. So in 2005, there's still no real camera that is comparable to an analog negative. And it's obvious that when this technology has arrived, it will be first available for Hollywood studios because they have the money. But the potential has been recognized. So they're using tricks to approach this cinema aesthetic. And one of these tricks was an optical 35 millimeter adapter, which is essentially a matte screen where the matte screen is semi-transparent, and then you project the image onto this matte screen, which is then recorded using a cheap camcorder. So you kind of get the cinema aesthetic for cheap. The problem with that matte screen, of course, is the surface structure of this matte screen, which means that if it isn't moving, the matte screen, you will see this structure after some time. So people started to think, how do we move this matte screen so it blurs in a way? And there were rotating adapters or vibrating adapters where the matte screen was losing the structure due to this motion. But that meant you have a motor with energy supply, and it also causes noise. So that wasn't successful as soon as larger sensors became available.
There's a mixture then of the film and the television technology. In this time, in the online form, there was a Dutch filmmaker. They were exchanging information about how to adapt this technology to a film camera. There was an American film manufacturer. They produced something, but this is the first one that was all open source with software and hardware together, and it's good for film. And the first one, I was $600, $800. It was relatively affordable, and it also had relatively high resolution. It was standard HD. To have full HD was relatively one of a kind at the time. In this moment, in 2006, this was the birth time and beginning of this project.
Es hatte zwar noch nicht den Namen und war einfach nur eine Online-Zusammenarbeit von auf der ganzen Welt verteilten Menschen, die
There were on these online forums, they were discussing these problems from people from all over the world. There was development. There was a community that was available to everyone. And this was the core first part of the project.
Open Source Cinema und die Entwicklung von
Open Source Cinema
eben eines
and the
35 mm Adapters
development of the open source film camera.
Es entstanden dann eine Reihe von Filmprojekten mit oder die Elfel-Kamera.
So there are many projects that were adapted to 35 millimeter cinema cameras. For example, there's this theme, World Force. It's not just the camera that's open source, but also the entire film process would be open source.
Porém, você tem que ver de uma outra parte, entendeu?
The challenge of this room, or this whole... Is the camera okay? Sequence take 1. The first big processors were from Canon, for example. They are compact cameras with the video. They're SLDR cameras that had this function for a symbol. For indie camera, for example, the Canon 5D Mark II was a staple in this community. They had difficulties. They needed to have a new open source project that they could go to. In 2009, the Canon camera was reverse engineered. And then this was called the Magic Lantern project. There are also other mirror reflex cameras. There are many effects here. And the Canon didn't want others to be able to do this. These SLDRs didn't have video capabilities often. Many manufacturers had different cameras available for cinema production on the market. In 2012, Eastman Kodak, one of the biggest camera negative producers in the world, they were then considering how much was film production left, and actually this market was broken. It became a niche in the future. There was a handful of 35mm cameras that were used for a project. A lot of times these were rented instead of owned. All of the technology was becoming digital. This had an effect on the market. There was a paradox in the situation. How do you actually afford all of this? And then they weren't accessible. So there was competition from every part of production, every part of the market. On one hand, they were blocking the production, and then they had their own particular production. They had a black box of proprietary software and hardware, and then they can't open it and they can't repair it, for example.
Only licensed partners or their own company was allowed to do maintenance. So the possibilities were actually decreasing, even though possibilities were increasing. And also the lifetime of a project, of a product was decreasing by a lot because new products were coming out all the time, which meant that support was no longer as interesting. So Magic Lantern became a radicalization pole of this new trend. So they wanted to create a new camera which should be changeable, modular, compatible to all the standards that were already existing, which is the birth of the Axiom. So everything is being developed under GPL for software, and we sell open hardware license for hardware. and the further developments are being shared with the public and the community. The first prototype proof of concept is being presented in MetaLab, the Vienna hackerspace. The camera runs Linux, and all the image processing happens in an FPGA in real time. There is no proprietary P-cores. Everything is open source. The team is very diverse. There's software developers, hardware developers, mechanics, for filmmakers, artists, and all are walking towards the same goal: to create tools that you can change, understand, and extend. And this doesn't only concern being able to repair, but also many other facets. Filmmakers often talk about the look of a movie. That means all the elements that for image composition, the film stock that has a specific characteristic, the colors, the lighting, the visual character, which is kind of the handwriting of a director, which means that they can use it to make their movies easily recognizable. So as it was, as in the past, people chose their specific film stock. Now they are choosing their specific camera. This is the result of proprietary image manipulation, and it's a secret what happens inside these cameras. So the Axiom, with all these ways to have an influence on this process, there's a lot more possibilities, both in terms of technology and creativity, to influence that. The Axiom Beta is the second generation hardware. It's a lot smaller than the prototype. It's a lot more modular, and it is being produced for developers in a small series production. It used to be a manual process. And for a few years, this year, since 2021, it's being produced industrially. There's a second generation of metal housing prototype, and now very fresh. It's possible to write uncompressed media to solid state media. So the technology has evolved. It's more powerful, but it's less accessible, and that doesn't improve. So the mission of the Axiom project is relevant and exciting as it was on the first day.
Vielen Dank, Sebastian.
Thank you very much.
Wunderbarer Talk. Tatsächlich hat das Internet einige Fragen dazu und ich
So the internet has some questions.
Die erste Frage ist, wie verbreitet ist denn die
First question is, how much is it in use?
50 Developer-Kits schon gebaut und verschickt international. Und der Schritt eben zur nächsten Stufe, jetzt vom Developer-Kit zur
The next step to the development kit or production camera,
mit Bedieninterface, Gehäuse und so
what
weiter.
everyone wants from a camera, a house, development
sozusagen. Das heißt, da sind wir noch dran. Aber ja, das ist so in etwa der Stand der Dinge im Moment.
That's the actual stand.
Vorhin ging es tatsächlich proprietäre Kameras.
So we were talking about proprietary cameras before. The question was that normally also refers to the data, so the data is proprietary as well. So isn't that a problem for archiving in 20 to 100 years?
Jetzt, weil natürlich nur die Tools und die Software vom eigenen Hersteller dann diese Dateien verarbeiten, lesen.
So there's tools coming from different manufacturers that can be manipulated, just like
the
acquisition. The data structure, the metadata, is all proprietary. So of course that's difficult.
Okay, thank you. There's a question, is everything open source? So is this also the schematics, the Verilog, the source code, everything?
Actually, everything is open source. This is open hardware, the schematics, the materials, of course, the firmware and software is also open source.
Sehr cool.
Very cool.
Dann gab es eine Frage, welche Objektive kann man denn mit der
Question,
Kamera benutzen?
What kind of optics can you use with the camera?
That's a big theme right now.
Uns eben nicht in eine Sackgasse hineinmanövrieren wollten, wie das eben die Hersteller tun, indem
So we don't want to bring it to where the manufacturers have brought it to.
Und was wir uns entschieden haben, ist einen E-Mount zu verwenden.
E-Mount.
Wo der Distanz zwischen dem Bajonett und der Sensoroberfläche sehr kurz
the
ist.
sensor surface
sonst an Objektiven und mechanischen Systemen
in between the lenses, and then there's a mechanical adapter.
Hat, glaube ich, eine Flange Focal Distance von 18 mm.
It has an 18 millimeter focal distance. This is usually longer for SLDR camera.
Da kann man praktisch alles drauf montieren, was
so then usually you can mount any lens on top of this.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you.
Dann gab es eine Frage zu HFR.
There was a question regarding HFR.
Kann man Motion Blur nicht einfach
Why can't you add motion blur in post-production as a digital effect? And one of the largest arguments against HFR was supposed to be that.
So this is an argument for it. It's intensified, this argument. Normally, when you film with a hybrid setup,
von der Framerate, das heißt, es gibt so eine Art
frame rate
80° Shutter,
Motion Blur, that we have motion blur,
angenehmsten empfinden sozusagen.
And this is maybe the most comfortable rate.
Technik, wie man Motion Blur digital,
We
also
don't know
natürlich
right
gibt es Techniken,
now
zum Beispiel
a natural
Frame
feeling
Blending machen
effect from
sozusagen.
a digital
Aber dass das wirklich angewendet
incurred
wird
motion blur.
in Massen und groß verbreitet, ist mir neu oder habe ich noch nie gehört.
I've never heard of it, at least.
Funktionieren, ob es wirklich gut aussieht
I would
oder
like
wie
to
gut es
try it
wirklich
if there is
funktioniert,
one. I
will ich
would
jetzt
like to
nicht
see if it
meine Hand
actually
vorlegen. Also
does
es ist
work
schon ein
if it's
Effekt, der einfach
digital
aus der
for motion
Bewegung
blur,
beim Drehen kommen
and see
soll.
can you actually film it this way.
Okay. Dann wurdest du gebeten, mal zu
And
erläutern,
you're
wie
asked
denn ein
to
typischer
explain how
Post-Production
a typical
Flow
post-production
auf
flow
Open-Source-Basis aussehen
on
könnte.
open source basis might look like.
Also grundsätzlich ist natürlich das erste die
Fundamentally,
Akquisition. Das
the
heißt,
first part is
das File wird
acquisition.
irgendwie aufgezeichnet am Set, dann oft gebackupt optimalerweise.
So acquired and then backed up,
Davon dann ein Daily rausgerechnet.
and then you make a daily from this footage.
File zum Beispiel.
So quickly put
Und
together
entweder damit
something
wird dann
from,
geschnitten oder das wird dann nochmal umgerechnet
then
und so
see if
weiter.
it's good
Und
enough, or
dann
then
entweder im letzten Schritt, also klassischerweise in
edit
der
it further. So this is
also
the
im
classical version
Finishing,
of
in der
Post.
Farbkorrektur greift man dann wieder zurück aufs Original.
Or if you need something, you can go back to
Rohdaten.
the original and see if you can find
Oder
something else.
mittlerweile, da
Or
es mit Computertechnik und
there's also
Speicherplatz mittlerweile
computer
auch nicht mehr so ein
techniques
Thema
and
ist, zieht man teilweise auch schon die gesamten
digital
Rohdaten durch die
copy
Produktion durch.
place.
Also es gibt jetzt nicht so den
It's
typischen Workflow,
then
sondern das
not a
entwickelt sich
typical
jeder, wie es
workflow.
braucht, wie es das Projekt braucht, wie es das Datenmanagement braucht. und so
You
weiter.
look at what the data management actually needs at this point.
Dann interessiert Menschen auch
Right.
die
So
Direktverschlüsselung
people are
mittlerweile
interested in
als Feature programmiert wurde.
is
Die
on-the-fly
Direktverschlüsselung
encryption
von
implemented.
Videodaten oder
Ja,
From the
der
video
Aufnahme.
data?
Yes.
würde grundsätzlich, denke ich, kein Problem sein. Die
I
Frage
would
ist, ob es
think
wirklich
fundamentally it's not a
passieren muss, weil natürlich
problem.
eine durchaus exzessive Datenmenge
Maybe a
wird in
problem if
Echtzeit.
it's
Das heißt,
working with
live
excessive amounts of
zu
data.
verschlüsseln macht wahrscheinlich wenig Sinn, aber was könnte
Maybe it doesn't
vor-
make
nach
sense
der Aufnahme
to
passieren?
encrypt
Also
it,
immer wenn die Kamera gerade nicht aufzeichnet, könnte man die Daten verschlüsseln. Das
but
wäre
in principle, you
grundsätzlich
could
ganz
encrypt it.
einfach möglich im Recorder.
It-
Wir verwenden einen
In Recorder,
Linux-Bordcomputer
in
im
Linux,
Moment.
you could
Das
have it
heißt,
on
alle
board.
Tools, die
It's
da
one of the
zur Verfügung
tools
stehen, wären
that's
da
possible to
sofort
implement.
einsetzbar in dem Sinn.
Dankeschön.
Thank you.
Dann hat jemand eine Frage
Next
zur,
question is
zur
about
Bildstabilisierung, glaube ich.
image
gibt es
stabilization.
eine Achsenstabilisierung in der Kamera,
Is an
weil es ja
axis
so herstellt, die
stabilization
das
in
im
camera.
Objektiv umsetzen, also welche das
Some
im Body,
vendors do this in
implementiert
body,
haben.
some vendors do this in the lenses.
Nein, gibt es nicht bei uns. Keine
Uh,
aktive Bildstabilisation.
There's no active picture stabilization with
Dankeschön.
this.
Und die letzte Frage, die Menschen stellen,
And the last
ist für eine
question
Massenproduktion in Überlegung.
is mass production planned.
Ja, das ist eine Geldfrage hauptsächlich. Also
That's an
Masse in
interesting
dem Sinn ist
question.
bei uns
What is a
eine
mass
ganz
production
andere
for
Definition.
us?
Also
For us, it has a
letztendlich
other
jeder sagt, ich
definition.
möchte Hardware in Masse produzieren.
What amounts
Der
are actually
Traum
being
wäre es
produced.
natürlich
The
irgendwann,
dream
dass unsere Kameras vom Förderband purzeln, ohne
is when we are
stehen zu bleiben sozusagen. Aber im Moment ist es
producing it in
einfach
a
eine
factory,
finanzielle Frage,
but
was
then
wir
it's a
uns
question of
leisten können,
finances
was
right
wir
now.
an Auftragsvolumen schaffen und stemmen können. Und im Moment sind wir
What
hier noch bei
volume
einer
is
sehr, sehr
possible?
kleinen Serie. Also die Masse sind bei uns wären schon 100 Stück eine
A
große
hundred,
Masse. Da fangen die
if there were
meisten
100 of these
Hersteller
produced,
noch
for us that would
ihre
be mass
Maschinen
production,
umzustellen.
and then it would be profitable
Wir
to
kommen
produce.
gerade auf Frischfragen rein. Ich würde einfach mal weiterlesen, wenn das okay ist.
Ja, gerne.
Okay, so there's some more questions. Can we continue?
Yeah,
Are there sequences in
Format, also wir
XR?
haben sozusagen ein Pure RAW Format.
there's a
entwickelt.
viewer
Also
raw
entwickelt ist vielleicht das
format.
falsche Wort. Es
Maybe a
kommen vom
wiki's
Bildsensor einfach
the
in
wrong word. There's a
Bayer-Muster,
picture
Color Filter
sensor.
Array, Bayer-Format Daten in 12-Bit pro Pixel.
There's a
Und die schreiben
12-bit
wir
per
einfach
pixel
sequenziell in ein File hinein. Das ist
format.
jetzt gar keine echte Dateistruktur, sondern
It's not
einfach
really a data
12-Bit pro
structure.
Pixel hinein ins File.
So it's the per pixel and then
Das
saved
ist
to the
sozusagen
file.
mal die Datenbasis für absolute Rohdaten. Und dann
That's
ist die
the
Frage,
data
wie man
for
weiter tut. Also
the
das schreiben
raw
wir im
data.
Moment. Und ob man das dann in ein ProRes umwandelt oder in ein XR zum Beispiel.
Or if
ist
you're
dann
putting
eigentlich
it
nur noch
into
eine Frage,
a
was
different
am
file
Achsenrekorder, wie
is a
gesagt, das
different
ist ein
question.
Linux-Computer, als nächster Schritt
This would be
passieren
the
soll.
next
möchte.
step that should happen.
Dankeschön. Lässt sich denn die
Thank you.
Axiom Beta Compact auch
Can the
ohne
Axiom
UV-Filter
Beta
oder
Compact
Infrarotfilter
be
beispielsweise
used
für
without
Infrarot-Aufnahmen verwenden?
infrared filter for infrared
Also der
recordings?
Filter ist im Moment
Yes.
entweder aufgeschraubt beim Developer-Kit
either on the
Oder
developer kit
Interaktionsplitter Compact zwischen Objektivmount und Sensor. Da
or
gibt's zwei
compact in
Layer
between
sozusagen
the
von Filterholdern.
lens and the
Einer davon
sensor.
ist eben ein UV-Infrarot-Sperrfilter
It's
oder
an infrared filter or
Bandpassfilter.
UV filter.
Und den kann man entweder rausnehmen, hineintun, einen anderen
So you
Filter noch
can
ergänzen und
take
das
that.
ist einfach so eine Art Lego-Baukasten.
So it's like putting together Legos.
Okay. Magst du noch mal sagen, welche Auflösung die Kamera kann?
Do you want to remind us of the resolution of the
Global
camera?
Shutter Sensor mit 12 Megapixel.
It's 12
Das sind 4000
megapixels.
mal 3000 Pixel. Bei 12-Bit Farbtiefe.
It's
Und
a
der
12
Sensor
bits
schafft bei
depth of
voller
field
Auflösung,
at
bei voller Performance bis zu
full
300 Frames
resolution.
pro Sekunde in 8-Bit. Bei 12-Bit ist ein bisschen langsamer.
And then 8 to 12 bit is a little bit slower.
Und dann interessiert Menschen, ob es möglich ist, zwei
And
Kameras
then people are asking if it's possible to combine two cameras for a stereoscopic picture.
Wir haben es noch nicht gemacht,
We
aber
haven't
grundsätzlich
done
die
that
Hardware
yet.
wäre alles vorhanden, um so eine
But all the hardware
Bildauslese-
is there
Synchronisation von
fundamentally.
Sensoren zu synchronisieren.
There might be interesting to try to synchronize the data coming in from the two different sensors. And then what do we need in terms of the accuracy coming from this? But fundamentally, you could, if you build the communication between them, you could combine them.
Ob es wirklich der Auslesestart am Bildsensor sein muss oder ob es jetzt
It's interesting questions
sind und so.
if you need to alter this at all.
Du hast übrigens den Rekord für die meisten Fragen gerade bekommen.
Okay, so you're doing the most questions.
Vielen Dank für den wunderbaren Vortrag.
Thank you for your great
Sehr
talk.
You're very welcome.
Hier geht es
And
weiter mit Hacking with
so
Five
thank you
und
for
Operating
the
Systems
attention from the translation
um
booth as well.
19:30 Uhr.
You just heard
Und jetzt
the
geht es
talk
weiter
about
mit einer
Axiom.
Aufnahme,
It was
mit einer
translated
Episode
by
der
Celeste
C3
and
News Show.
Tribut. That's me.
Viel
If you have any
Spaß und
feedback,
nochmal
please
vielen
use the
Dank für den
hashtag
Vortrag.
C3Lingo on social media. Goodbye.
This is the C3 News Show. Good evening, this is the C3 News Show. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and beautiful creatures out there. I'm Khaleesi, and I'm ready to kick off the evening with you. I hope you enjoyed your day in the RC3 world, or maybe just started your day in the world and looking for some bits and pieces to discover. No worries, we will provide you with all that in just a few minutes. But firstly, someone really special sat down with us and we created a really cool interview. They became famous for the idea for that hack this year. You know, it's Lilith and Flipke, and Flipke took some time to talk about just that. The stage is yours, Flipke. Welcome, Flipke, and thank you for taking the time. Welcome, Flipke, and thank you for taking the time. You may quickly introduce yourself, and then we will go on about the stuff that made you certainly famous this year.
Yeah, hi, I'm Flipke, and I'm known from Twitter, maybe, and I'm a security researcher.
So taking software apart seems to be kind of your thing. So what happened with the ID wallet this year?
So this ID wallet thing was based on blockchain technology, and there was no reason to use a blockchain technology, and that kind of triggered me to take a closer look at it. At first, I wasn't really keen on taking apart the blockchain part of it, so I went the easy route and took a look at the infrastructure from the vendor, which resulted in the vendor taking offline all of their infrastructure immediately. And then later on, Lilith and me took a closer look at the actual blockchain technology and the ID wallet app. We did not discover a flaw in the blockchain technology, but we discovered a flaw in the algorithm or the procedures used for verifying your identity.
If the blockchain wasn't the problem, what was the problem with this ID wallet solution?
So, first of all, one has to understand the procedure for verifying one's identity or driving license. The procedures is as follows. So first of all, one has to understand the procedures. If you have to verify your driving license, the police shows you a QR code, you scan the QR code, your app says the police wants to see your driving license, and you click accept. The problem is, anyone can be the police. You can write arbitrary data into that QR code, and it will get displayed in the app without being verified. So I could write, hello, I'm your airline, please give me your passport details, and then you would leak your passport details to me. And that is a non-vulnerability that was previously reported by the BSI to the vendor, the Federal Office for IT Security in Germany. And the vendor didn't do anything, but went on with the release of the ID Wallet app, which got eventually published to the app stores, but was quickly depublished after the feedback from Lilith and me.
All right, and then there was some aftermath, and I heard something about people with hacking Affinitäten. What happened there?
So when I took a look at the infrastructure of the vendor, they quickly took all of their infrastructure offline, and the vendor had to explain what they did to the Bundeskanzleramt. And in this letter, they accuse us to be a Zusammenrottung aus dem Kreise der politischen Gegner mit Hacking-Affinität. And I think that's quite funny, especially considering that they just took offline all of their infrastructure just because of someone shit posting and demonstrating a zone transfer and subdomain takeover and saying, oh, there's a MySQL listening on the internet, probably belongs to your name server.
All right, I think that sounds quite funny. What would you give the... that sounds quite funny. Okay. That sounds quite funny. What would you tell the future Zusammenrottung mit Hacking-Affinitäten on their way while breaking things on the internet?
Yeah, bildet Banden, be a Zusammenrottung, use Tor, encrypt your backups.
Thank you, Flipke.
And yeah, stay safe. Thanks.
All right, great. Thank you, Flipke.
Thank you so much,
Thanks.
Flipke, for taking the time and for all the
Thank you so much, Flipke, for taking the time and for all the work you do. I think it's certainly very important, and with all the stuff going on at the moment, it's even more important.
Like in every show, we also like to introduce one of our amazing chaos channels to you. And this time it's one of my personal favorite hackerspaces. It's an space station, actually, and I guess some of you might already know what I'm talking about. Of course, it's the Seabase.
Willkommen an Bord der Seabase, der Raumstation unter Berlin-Mitte. Wir haben hier 3 Bühnen und ein Studio für euch aufgebaut und produzieren Vorträge. Das Ganze findet unter 2G-Plus-Bedingungen statt. Das heißt, alle Mitwirkenden müssen geimpft und täglich getestet sein. Wir produzieren ungefähr 30 Vorträge und sind 24 Stunden, 4 Tage für euch da. Viel Spaß!
Whoa, that was most certainly amazing, and there are still more amazing teams and channels coming your way, so stay tuned.
And of course, we send out our busy reporters just collecting really amazing stuff for you. And as they did last year, this year as well, the Hexen created a quite amazing assembly. But Einwickler, prepared some insights for you.
This time I'm visiting the Hexen Assembly and it's really Hey Chaos Creatures! This time I'm visiting the Hexen Assembly and it's really worth a visit. You can listen to some Hexen podcast, learn about important Hexen of history in the memorial, visit an exhibition about the life in the pandemic, get yourself some book recommendations from the library, hint, don't go into the furnace, release your anger by writing it down for once, and finally find the treasure in the maze. You can find the assembly by using the Solar Island portal in the lobby, and it's right next to the ball pit.
And as always, here's the Fahrplan for you. And as always, here's the Fahrplan for you.
Let's have a look on the next 4 highlights. Let's have a look on the next 4 highlights of this evening on day 3 of our remote chaos experience. Looky! IT security professionals. Number 1. 8 p.m. IT security professionals. At 8 p.m. on the Hexen stage. Yes, the panel on IT security professionals. What do they actually do all day? Why they are always so professionally annoyed? Is that still in scope? Join Lena, Maren, Caro, Lisa and Christiana talking about everyday life in our IT security world. Afterwards they will be available in a short Q&A. And therefore you can join the big blue button room after the panel. Watch out at 8 p.m. at the Hexen stage. At 8 p.m. at the Chaos Zone TV. 2. At 8 p.m. at the Chaos Zone TV, there is Inside Bundestag with Anke Dobscheidsberg. She gives us an insight into her past 4 years in her work as a member of the German Bundestag. She will also talk about the topics she has covered during this time in German Parliament, how it works under normal conditions and how it adapted to the pandemic. Join Anke for an awesome talk at Chaos Zone. 3. The Informatics Live Band. Yeah, where is the band? Right, on the C3 launch at 8 o'clock there is a nerd punk rock and roll band called the Informatics. Tune in and let's rock together. Number 4, at the Franconia stage at 9 p.m. Yeah, how bad digitalization is in Germany, you ask? Our education system in times of Corona is therefore a very good example. As we all know, a shitty process is after digitalization still a digital shitty process. Yeah, so let's have a look. Will there be hope if we use the lessons learned? Yes. Therefore, watch at 9 p.m. the Franconia stage. These were 4 examples of the very good program, but as you know, you can choose between all these other nice talks from the Fahrplan. So choose wisely, otherwise you can look everything at media.ccc.de. Back to the news show.
That's it for tonight's show. Thank you so much. And
that's it for tonight's show. Thank you so much. And there is still time to grab the ingredients for the cocktail for tonight's show. We will tweet them soon. And yeah, enjoy the night and see you soon at 2400.